Hey lovely sexy hobby people, welcome to today's video, which is going to be Wargames Illustrated flick through and catch up, issue 435. What do we got? Looks like the sack of Rome, or possibly the gladiator slave uprising on the front depicted. It says Gangs of Rome in-depth review here, but it looks interesting, so come and join me on the desk and we'll have a flick through. Hey lovelies. Right, shall we have a look at Wargames Illustrated issue 435. This is catch up. It is from March 2024, but let's have a quick flick through and see what was in this month's, or that month's issue. So, observation post. Just dealing with some new releases here. At the time, one of them was Osprey Games Frostgrave Mortal Enemies, talking about how you can include mortal enemies into your games, and talking about, you know, things that you can give them, and what extra stats, magical items, that sort of thing you can assign a mortal enemy within Frostgrave. We then have some Northstar Oathmark Human Militia, and these look really good. They're scaled at 28mm, fantasy, hard plastic. Included are 6 matching frames with enough parts to build 30 figures, along with square bases to mount them on. Now it looks like they come pre-mounted to round bases. So the square bases, obviously, for those that like to do the rank and file for their fantasy games, would be brilliant. But for those that prefer others like looser skirmish games, these round bases, I'm going to turn around and say that they seem okay, but I would probably still seek to put them onto a 25mm base as a minimum. But yeah, they come on, obviously, runners, and they look fantastic. Certainly well worth a look if you're looking to expand your miniatures for things like Dungeons and Dragons. Partisan Press, set in the East Ablaze, 3rd and final edition. So this deals with conflicts in that area from 1914 through to mid-1930s. And it looks really good for those that like that period, and it gives you the opportunity to war game certain scenarios and do what if encounters if that's what you want to do. Release radar. ModelRailBaseboards.com are releasing a 6x4 MDF or all birch ply table for gaming on, so you can use this for Dungeons and Dragons or other gaming. It does have a raised, or a sunken bed, I'm going to call it, rather than a raised surround. I'm going to say it's got a sunken bed, so that if you're rolling dice on the table, hopefully you're not going to lose them off the table. And you can get, obviously, ancillaries such as cup holders, etc., that clip on around the edge. Various bits and pieces being released. We've got a 28mm scale bridge here from FenrisGames.com, and then some smaller scale from BrigadeModels.co.uk, fortifications and castles. And darkops.co.uk are released, or have released, these hab units and corridors. Now these being octagonal, kind of remind me of the hab blocks from the Anphelion project that Games Workshop produced, the Anphelion scenery, which went along with their Imperial Armour 4. And then there's a Pulp in Space, which is from caliberbooks.com, and it's basically Tales of Daring Do, and it's rules. These are rules for space opera gaming and battles in similar sort of pulp settings, and takes a camp sci-fi. And takes in camp sci-fi from the early 60s up to the 2000s. So if you like adding in things like, you know, Lost in Space, battling, like the 1970s Battlestar Galactica, then you could probably do that. We got some boats produced here from Skytrax, and this is a boat that was used during D-Day as harbour protection. It's HMS Medusa, and then we have this Coast Guard patrol boat here, and that's from Kurasan Miniatures.tripod.com. We have some steam engine crew in white metal here from the First Corps, but they are also producing some 1970s and 80s British troops and paramilitary gunmen, Royal Ulster Constabulary, Armed Police and Intelligence Company figures for gaming Northern Ireland in the Troubles. Please excuse how I sound today. I do have a stinking cold. Finally, Skytrax have announced the acquisition of renowned Murawski miniatures, range of 28mm Napoleonic figures. These included the fantastic Grand Duchy of Warsaw and Polish Vistula Legion lines. So, quick fire, readers' letters. One guy writing in about how he uses natural terrain on his games. Another guy writing in about his scratch built stuff. And yeah, as I say, just readers' letters. And then it has building the Battle of Hattin, which occurred in 1187. This was an interesting article, and it was about a guy who decided to recreate the Battle of Hattin, which is during the Crusades, as a museum display piece, and it goes through the build process, what gave him the idea, then setting it up here and painting the background, etc., the baseboard, through to some pictures of the finished diorama. And it also gives you some by the numbers figures. It tells you how many miniatures, how long it took, and so on and so on. But to give you an idea, it says Crusaders, miniatures used, Crusaders 1,191 infantry, 84 dead and 339 cavalry, including the rider. Saracens, 1,363 infantry, 59 dead and 410 cavalry, also including the rider. And then others, there were also 48 dead horses and 3 riderless horses. But the board looks fantastic, and with the size and scope of it, you know, there is the potential for you to take photographs on this board without the need of the backdrop. Right, Civis Romanus Sum. Basically, I am a Roman citizen. And this is, instead of legions fighting the barbarian hordes, this is basically gangs of Rome. So it's a smaller skirmish style game that has been produced from Footsore. And yeah, it looks great because you get all these different like gangs that you can produce with different traits for fighting within Rome itself, the first capital. And then there's this article on Nick Foley, who basically produced a very small vignette based on the crowning of Henry Tudor. Talks about how he did it, the inspiration, and where he got the miniatures from, and then obviously the finished vignette there. The Barons War Grand Melee 2023 Championship. So, tournament report. And then an article on how to enhance your MDF terrain. Now, I don't have a lot of MDF terrain. In fact, I think I don't have any MDF terrain. I prefer plastic or resin. But you can obviously enhance your MDF terrain by using add-on extras. You know, things like using pipes, using straws as pipes, or buying like some of the sci-fi pipe sets or Greebly sets from people like Mantic Games and their terrain crate, or Games Workshop and some of their terrain kits. There was a really great producer of sci-fi bits that could be used with various buildings, and that was Antonicitys Workshop, and it's such a shame that they folded. They were a victim of the end of the COVID-19 pandemic and the rising cost of living, and they just couldn't keep up, despite having a few sort of like flash sales to try and generate income. I've still got some of their stuff which I will look to recast for my own use, but they did all sorts of great things like tavern scenery sets, bunk beds, sci-fi beds, air purifiers, power nodes, aircon units, all sorts of stuff. They even produced like sci-fi doorways that you could use if you were scratch building buildings. But yeah, the article just takes you through some of the techniques that they've used on this. And then a festering also, the Battle of Toulouse on 10th of April 1814. Colonel, retired, Bill Gray, introduces us to the battle that proved that there was still bite in Napoleon's army in Spain even after their exit from the peninsula. So, talking about that battle and the wargaming, how it was done, orders of battle, the Anglo-Allied army, and then the French army of Spain. And then batch painting, Fire Forge, Asagari. So this is for the feudal Japan, medieval Japanese plastics. So Fireforge Games, new range of medieval Japanese plastics. These look great. Pikeman here, which they've done. He's just going through step by step how he's painted them. And the final result. And then a quick article on doing a bit of sprue stretching, where you just heat the sprue over a flame, not in the flame but over the flame, and as it becomes soft you just pull it apart and you get basically a plastic string which can be used as bow strings. Pristine painted French Napoleonics. Eddie Birmingham has won several awards at the Hammerhead painting competition, which WI sponsors and judges. After finding out his winning Napoleonic entries were all taken from a single army, we asked him to bring his collection to the WIHQ for a photo shoot. And what you have is a series of photographs detailing and showing how well presented this army is. Regimenting Slain's Half Dead. So Callum France turns some packs of Warlord Games slain figures into a ranked up unit for old school fantasy gaming. And again, there's a step-by-step talk through of how he painted the figures with their what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of like decaying flesh tones, I suppose you could call it. Pirate Saints and Crusaders. Article on how an English buccaneer saved the Crusades. Steve Tibble casts his expert eye over the adventures of Godric of Finchale, an unlikely individual who was pivotal in the continuation of the Crusader states. The history concludes with an exciting, fast-paced, never mind the boat hooks naval scenario. So talking about that time in history before going on to the how to play Escape from Arsuf. And then another article on board building on a budget, how you can do that. And this is kind of like an example of trenches, building trenches. Now personally, if I'm doing a trench board, I do, because I'm ex-forces, you know, I prefer my trench parapet to be level with the ground, rather than as they've done here, which is you've got the ground and then it ramps up and then you've got, like, to me that's more of a barricade than a trench, but you know, we won't split hairs for the purpose of wargaming. But yeah, you know, I can see why they would do it in that way, and it just gives an example of how you can build on a budget. And then Wargames Illustrated Awards 2023. And that's the final article in this flick through. Okay. And the last few pages are advertising. So, there you go. That was that. Hope you enjoyed that. It was just a quick flick for catching up. I think one of the most interesting articles for this has to be the Battle of Hattin. That was really interesting read for me. But hopefully you'll join me in the next video, and I will see you then. Alright, take care. Bye bye.